I'm gonna be blunt. I'm remaking my Lore Olympus videos into one big video because there were a lot of mistakes and jumping to conclusions with not enough nuance. Even though I can't change the original videos themselves, I can show you what I learned now. But if I ever make a comment this long explaining myself, so much so that I add read pinned comment in the title so more people could read it, I didn't do that good of a job explaining myself in the first place. These view counts are too high for that, so I already unlisted both videos, but the links will be in the description. Every YouTuber dislikes their older uploads and I'm no different. But I'm really grateful for anyone who's watched any of my videos and enjoyed them anyway. I promise I won't remake any more after this one. Also, I'm pronouncing this name as Persephone from now on. I was thinking of pronouncing it as Persephone, but apparently either way is right in the English language. It's complicated. Instead of repeatedly referring to my original videos, I'm just gonna present this one like any other normal essay. This script is already too long for those kinds of reevaluations. I can't analyze everything that happens in Lore Olympus, but I'll try to be more cohesive and open-ended this time. Also spoilers, they're everywhere. Okay, here's the actual video. Greek mythology has been ingrained into Western pop culture for centuries. It's everywhere. Logos, video games, logos, movies, logos, books, and logos. The myth of Persephone's kidnapping is no exception, and in fact, it seems to have made a recent comeback through retellings. While every retelling is different from one another in some way, there are many that frame this myth as a romance, and Lore Olympus is one of the most recent examples, if not the most popular one so far. Lore Olympus is an ongoing comic on Webtoon written by Rachel Smythe, which retells the Persephone myth as a modern romance, complete with smartphones, laptops, clubbing, and much more. It's got 1.2 billion readers, and it's the most popular comic on the Webtoon US server. It's been published as a physical book, and there's supposed to be a Netflix animated series in the works by the Jim Henson Company. Okay, cool. Lore Olympus wants to make Hades and Persephone's relationship mutual. Hades isn't a kidnapper, and Persephone actually likes him back. But while the comic tries making this relationship more salvageable, it ironically makes the hymn its retelling look more progressive in turn. Through its retelling of Persephone's kidnapping, Lore Olympus decenters and villainizes its own female characters and uses trauma to prop up its male protagonists for romance. Before I go any further, I have some disclaimers. Within ancient Greek context, rape means abduction, not specifically sexual assault. So sometimes I'll use abduction to describe Persephone's kidnapping, the abduction of Persephone. Retellings don't have to be accurate to their original stories. They're retellings for a reason. I love a lot of them, including retellings of Greek myth. Supergiant's Hades and Disney's Hercules come to mind. But it's important to understand how Lore Olympus' story changed the original hymn in a way that can hurt its intention of being a more progressive, even more feminist version of the actual myth. Do not harass Rachel Smythe. I respect her for putting herself out there at all, and it's great that she's garnered success through doing so. She's getting a Netflix bag. But being inflammatory and accusatory of her is being inappropriate. You can have your opinion and then some, but hear me out. Maybe don't accuse her of serious crimes because you dislike her comic. Criticizing female-oriented media is fine too. I'm doing that right now. But don't put it down just because it's for women and girls. That's already common for society to do. Calling the female audience stupid or insecure for engaging with specific media is dismissive. And for that matter, if you like reading Lore Olympus, that's cool. You're not a bad person for liking it. I understand if you end up getting uncomfortable if you do watch this, but if you keep reading, that's fine. We all have to be aware of flaws and things we like. And even though I don't really like Lore Olympus anymore, I'm not saying you shouldn't like it either. The abduction of Persephone is an ancient Greek myth that explains the seasons. Looking for a wife, Hades, god of the underworld, kidnaps the goddess of spring, Persephone. Demeter, who's goddess of the harvest and Persephone's mother, goes to find her daughter and leaves the earth to die. This forces Zeus to send the messenger god, Hermes, down to the underworld and get Persephone back. But Hades sneaks Persephone 6 pomegranate seeds that force her to stay in the underworld for half the year. Some have said she was starved to eat them from hunger, or that Hades directly forced her to eat them. During spring and summer, Persephone's up in the mortal realm with Demeter. When it's fall and winter, Persephone's down in the underworld with Hades. While many Greek myth fans claim there are different ancient versions of this myth where Persephone willingly goes to the underworld, the Homeric hymn to Demeter is the oldest known rendition we have. It was written in the late 7th or early 6th century BC. I've tried finding these ancient versions where Persephone willingly goes to the underworld, but I've only found word of mouth, blog and wiki posts from people who aren't credible, or obviously newer retellings altogether. In the ancient Roman version, Persephone has a water nymph friend named Cyane. When she learns Persephone was kidnapped, Cyane joins the lake and turns into water from grief. Hesiod was the first known ancient Greek poet to briefly mention Persephone's kidnapping in mythos, as he wrote in his Theogony that Zeus impregnated Demeter with her, so Hades kidnapped his niece, and mythology gets weird sometimes. Demeter's hymn was probably written before the Theogony, which was written in the 8th to 7th century BC. Some people say Homer could have written it, but the author for the hymn is actually unknown. Either way, Demeter's hymn goes into much more detail describing the abduction of Persephone. Translated by Harvard professor of classics Gregory Nagy, lines 19 through 23 read, "He seized her against her will, put her on his golden chariot, and drove away as she wept. She cried with a piercing voice, calling upon her father Zeus, the son of Cronos, the highest and the best. But not one of the immortal ones, or of human mortals, heard her voice." With this text in mind, the abduction of Persephone has been depicted in art throughout the centuries as an explicit kidnapping too. The royal tomb of Regina from 4th century BC depicts the event through a fresco wall painting, with Hermes leading Hades' chariot. Gian Lorenzo Bernini's 1622 sculpture, The Rape of Proserpina, is arguably the most well-known artwork of Hades kidnapping Persephone. A more recent and musical example comes from Disney's 1934 animated short film, The Goddess of Spring. It was used as a test run for animating the human characters in Snow White, which gives a lot more context to Persephone's boneless movements. But not this deer though. There's no indication that Persephone's feelings for Hades change in Demeter's hymn either. When he tells her she'll see her mother again and that she'll benefit from being his wife, she jumps for joy and doesn't verbally respond to anything he says at all. She was probably more excited about seeing her mother again than gaining favor in the underworld. So for some time, if you were aware of Greek mythos to an extent, you probably knew the abduction of Persephone as just that, an abduction. It was common for many ancient societies, including ancient Greece, to have men kidnap their wives. But it's telling how Demeter's hymn is so focused on a mother who wants to bring her daughter back from a marriage that neither woman consented to. Zeus gave Hades permission to kidnap Persephone himself, and Gaia, who personifies the earth, helps Hades lure Persephone away from her friends into a narcissus flower so he can kidnap her. None of Persephone's loved ones have positive feelings about her marriage. Even the goddess of witchcraft, Hecate, approaches Demeter, tells her what happened to Persephone, and joins a fellow goddess to find Helios, the personification of the sun. While Demeter's hymn is mostly used to explain the seasons from ancient Greeks' perspectives, there are a lot of obvious themes, intentionally there or not, that are about women's anger and pain, a mother's love for her daughter, and patriarchal systems taking away women's autonomy. While Persephone and Demeter experience something horrible, they both survive and are able to connect with each other again. Just because parts of ancient Greek culture normalized women marrying complete strangers, that didn't make it okay. And through this story, maybe ancient Greek women felt seen. Maybe they didn't feel so alone in their struggles through Persephone. And maybe some mothers wanted to channel their own inner Demeter. Anyway, the late 20th century. Like I said before, retellings don't have to be accurate to their original stories. It's not inherently bad to retell the abduction of Persephone as a romance either, something that's become more common over the years. The idea of Hades and Persephone being in love, even within ancient Greek mythos canon itself, seems relatively new. Epicurus the Sage is a 1989 DC Comics adult-oriented comedy about ancient Greek philosopher Epicurus, who's tasked to bring Persephone back to Demeter. He learns that Hades and Persephone staged the kidnapping because Demeter's so overbearing. In the 1995 series Hercules' Legendary Journeys,
Hades actually does kidnap Persephone.
So Demeter asks for Hercules' help. However, Persephone loves Hades but thought it was wrong for him to kidnap her. He only did it because he and Demeter hate each other. Hercules also mentions it's strange that Persephone loves Hades at all, and he's not wrong. The series seems to point out how weird and petty these gods are through Hercules' character, as his dialogue may mirror what some viewers are thinking.
You know, Hades really isn't so bad.
Right, the guy who abducts girls and pigs, they should build a statue for him.
The 2019 web series God School depicts Hades and Persephone as a secret high school couple, as Hades is like an emo boyfriend and Persephone is frustrated with hiding their love at all. Even Minthe, a previous lover of Hades in Greek myth, is introduced as Persephone's jealous rival, turning into mint leaves at will. Punderworld is also a Hades and Persephone comic on Webtoon, published a year after Lore Olympus. It involves a consensual but secret romance too. On the other side of the coin, there are still modern interpretations framing Hades and Persephone's relationship less charitably, no matter how their relationship came to be. Not that these interpretations are completely negative, just that they're at the very least rocky. The 2010 musical Hadestown is not only about Hades and Persephone, but also the Orpheus and Eurydice myth. These two couples' relationships intertwine throughout the story, influencing each other and the individual characters involved. In short, while Hades and Persephone are able to repair their relationship, Orpheus and Eurydice aren't so lucky. The 2010 film The Lightning Thief is an adaptation of the first Percy Jackson novel of the same name. Here, Persephone actively resents Hades because, according to her,
He's cruel and abusive.
God of War Chains of Olympus is a 2008 game where Persephone explains how she came to be Hades' wife and grew vengeful of the gods.
Do you think it was my choice to wed a man I did not love? Live a life I did not choose? I was betrayed by the very gods that once saw me as their own, but no more.
2018's Assassin's Creed Odyssey follows suit, with the same origins of her marriage as Chains of Olympus.
He's tried, of course, to bond with me, but what can he expect out of a prisoner? Love? That's just stuff of legend.
And let's not forget 2018's Hades by Supergiant. You play as Zacharias trying to reach the Mortal Realm and meet a bunch of gods that give you powers to succeed. I'm actually pretty biased here. I highly recommend it, but I didn't finish it yet, so no spoilers.
I'm blocking you.
Lore Olympus is one of the romantic retellings that wants to modernize the story it's based on. In some ways, it does exactly that. By putting the gods in a more modern setting, they'll have more modern principles and taboos, but characters are still very flawed like their original ancient counterparts. The story tackles heavy themes like purity culture and consent, and Hades and Persephone want to pursue each other, but even Lore Olympus base presentations are shaky. I'm not a professional artist. I know making a comic and drawing something over and over takes a lot of hard work, so I won't harp on this for long. The art uses contrast and colors to give the world of Lore Olympus a unique, otherworldly aesthetic. The wordless storytelling throughout the comic is also really nice. I'm not explaining what happens in these panels, but if you know, you know. And if you don't, well, it still looks nice anyway, and I assume you can get a general idea of what some of these panels are conveying. I also personally like that the characters' hands and fingers have been more consistent lately. Look at all these nicely drawn appendages! I still wish the character designs were more distinct from each other. Characters will usually have very similar facial features and body types. Some outfits they wear are cute on their own and have notable differences, but other outfits will look similar on characters with different personalities. They almost never wear anything inspired by their lore. And yes, even though it's cool Persephone is a short woman like me, most of the men are significantly taller than the women. The height differences are ridiculous sometimes, I'm not gonna lie. Color contrasts are the heavy lifters for the overall designs, as there's very little visual language to automatically signal which gods are which aside from background references. Hephaestus is one of the few exceptions, with his warm orange skin and prosthetic limbs referencing his original disability and role as a god of fire and blacksmithing. I also liked Leto's first appearance in the story. She wore a completely flat triangular cap and a veil that darkened over her mouth like a gradient. It made her look creepy and mysterious. But these two characters are still exceptions to a rule. Can you tell which goddess is Iris and which one's Hecate? Trick question. It's Aphrodite and Hera. Don't look it up. I'm right. And, personal opinion? I don't like Persephone's pointy bodice in her queen form. I just don't think it complements her chest. I know it's supposed to look sexy, but okay, what if her dress had a keyhole neckline, or if it was like off the shoulder, because this bodice looks uncomfortable for her more than anything. I mean, really uncomfortable? The writing, on the other hand, is a whole different monster. The plot suffers from the problem too much stuff, not enough space. This results in a lot of neglected plot elements and poor payoff for an already established setup. For example, episode 92 ends on a cliffhanger where Ares accidentally hits his mother, Hera. It ends on a panel of her crouched down on the ground, with her face buried in her hands. And then in the very next episode, she gets up and leaves. This is never mentioned again. Eros and Psyche's relationship is another example. Eros' love for her was the driving force that, for all intents and purposes, stuck Hades and Persephone together for the rest of the story. Eros helped his mother put a complete stranger in serious danger to see Psyche again. But as Lore Olympus goes on, their relationships focus on less and less. Episode 219 seems to allude to their marriage after truly reuniting in episode 170, but before Eros can show the wedding photos to Persephone, the story calls him away. Ah darn. Hope the fan wiki gets updated later to tell me about that inevitable payoff that's gonna greatly benefit the plot and characters through flashbacks. Their relationship was rarely developed throughout the story anyway, so when they reunite, it doesn't feel planned or even earned. Though it feels like Hades and Persephone's relationship develops too quickly, despite the little time they've actually spent together, episodes will also read unnecessarily slow and hurt the overall pacing. Keep in mind that Lore Olympus is very plot driven when I say that within the narrative, 2 weeks span over the first 105 episodes. 105! Also, episode 206, I really disliked episode 206 because there's this tense and serious enough build up before with Persephone going toe to toe with Kronos, who possessed a bunch of the gods in the underworld, and she eats the pomegranate seeds and grows into her super queen form, and you're excited to see how the battle unfolds in the next episode. So you click on the next button and it only lasts for a couple panels within one episode, and is that a helicopter? And news reporters, where do they come from? What are they doing here? Tonight we're witnessing Lore in the making. Wait, how did the reporters get here? How do they know about this? This is so unserious. The tonal shift is giving me whiplash. Why are things happening this way? I could go more in detail with stuff like this, but that's not what the video is about. So the romance sounds like a good place to start with explaining how Lore Olympus retells Demeter's hymn. It's the selling point of the comic, but even the romance we're supposed to root for starts off uncomfortably and, frankly, comes off as predatory. It's impossible to seriously talk about Lore Olympus without also mentioning arguably, the most controversial thing about Lore Olympus is the drastic age gap between the two main protagonists. This is specifically because Persephone starts the story at 19 and Hades is already over 2,000 years old. While Persephone is an actual teenager because of her literal human age, Hades is clearly characterized as an older man, despite his age being unrealistic. If he were human, he'd probably be in his 40s, maybe even older than that.
Oh my god! You're 40?
Obviously, an age gap like this can't be replicated in reality, but when the gods themselves treat such relationships like our modern society would, this plot element gets hard to ignore. Although relationships with significantly older men and much younger women have been normalized, there's still a widespread discomfort because of the specifically predatory dynamics these relationships can have. Lore Olympus will frequently remind readers how old and young these two characters are, especially when comparing them. Here are some examples. When Aphrodite and Eros sneak a drunk Persephone into Hades' car as a prank, Aphrodite automatically thinks Persephone will see Hades as a creepy old man when she wakes up in his car. Hecate says she believed Hades was using her younger friend for casual sex. Persephone's age is brought up several times, from when Artemis asks if she wants to live on Olympus with her, to when Hecate tells Hades how old Persephone is, to Hera asking her if she stopped aging at 19. Ares asks Persephone if she knows how old Hades is by joking that he's a bazillion years older than her. In their human disguises, Hades has gray hair while his brothers don't. She's still too young, and I'm still a complete mess. One of the Furies claims Hades looks old enough to be Persephone's father. He looks like her dusty ass dad. Lore Olympus further hammers in how big the age gap is by giving only Persephone a concrete established age in text. None of the other legal adult characters have concrete ages like her, barely even approximate ones, and it's kept pretty ambiguous for them in the current timeline. I looked up their ages on the fan wiki, and they're usually labeled unknown or completely unavailable. Even Hades himself points out how young Persephone is several times shortly after learning her age. His inner monologue calls her a teenager. That's what she is. Several characters will assume Hades is preying on her because she's so young and naive, but this is the only conflict that comes up. It doesn't really go anywhere. The themes that are there exploring this age gap don't go into depth. It's not like their relationship is negatively affected either. It's just outsiders complaining and Hades occasionally mentioning how old she is, while their romance keeps progressing at lightning speed anyway. While Hades knows the social implications of their age gap, Persephone seems completely unaware. Hades' inner monologue mentions how she doesn't give a crap about their social structure. Other characters and the story itself will undermine whatever harm there could be too. For every character's negative opinion about this potential romance, there are 5 more scenes that show these opinions are wrong. All the characters who worry about this dynamic either drop it eventually or are some kind of antagonists that readers are supposed to root against. Hera and Hecate are the most notable examples of relatively heroic characters who first have negative feelings about this relationship. In episode 20, Hera grills Hades for his interest in Persephone by gravely telling him that she's young, easy to impress, won't argue with you. As Hades' confidant in Lore Olympus, when Hecate learns the 2 protagonists are mingling through a tabloid article, she gets visibly upset at Hades and starts to cry. Zeus specifically shuts Hera down when she tells him about the age gap too, but several episodes later, both she and Hecate start throwing their worries out the window. You could argue their sudden change of heart shows they misjudged Hades, but we never see how they came to that conclusion. What exactly changed their minds? There's not even a possible answer for Hecate, but Hera seems to give Hades a chance because of his loneliness, which doesn't sound like a justifiable reason to change your mind about your very old brother-in-law drooling over a 19-year-old girl you personally know, but I'll get to it. The gods have more modern principles, but they're inconsistent. They think mass murdering humans with or without permission is fine, but a graying man dating a 19-year-old is where they draw the line. And yet, Lore Olympus failed to take the opportunities to really challenge this age gap beyond dialogue that's largely brushed over. But that's okay. 3 episodes after Persephone turns 20, she keeps that birthday celebration going by kissing Hades. This can't be weird. No, it can't be that petty. A 10-year time skip occurs because of plot, and Persephone is currently 30.
30? You think I'm 30?
I think it's cool that Smythe bit the bullet and aged Persephone up before she and Hades officially stayed together, instead of doubling down and immediately rushing her into marriage. She does look a little older, and she seems less ignorant of the world around her. It happens really late in the story, but at least she doesn't become a wife at 20 when she barely lived her life away from her mother and her love interest. Wish we could see more of that though. However, Hades and Persephone don't just have an age gap to worry about either. There's also an imbalance in their workspace too. When Hera changes her mind about Hades and later gives Persephone an internship under his company to test his actions, Hades becomes her boss. He displays favoritism by giving her special treatment as an employee and overstepping boundaries to get closer to her. He gives her lavish gifts at work, gives her a formal introduction to staff when interns don't get initiations, and pays her when his interns are unpaid. Persephone herself knows she isn't qualified for this internship. Hades actually gives her a salary that many of his other employees deserved more. Put a pin in that. While the age gap conflict is dropped altogether like it was never there, the favoritism is usually framed romantically, and there's even less of an attempt at challenging this dynamic. When Hades gives Persephone a beautiful comb in one scene, she cherishes it, and it's supposed to showcase his genuine love for her. There's even more emphasis put on this comb in later episodes, where she gives it to a pawn shop and learns it's extremely valuable. Hades also gives Persephone her first bank account and bends the rules for his staff to accommodate her. This is seen as a bonding moment for them with some drama sprinkled in, but there's very little implying that what Hades is doing is actually inappropriate. When he glares at a bank employee for stating the rules and subtly threatens her job, it's framed as comedic and silly. The characters who specifically point out the favoritism are also mocked or dismissed. When Persephone gets an initiation, Hades' then girlfriend Minthe points out that Persephone is only an intern, and Hecate smirks. So she panics about the age gap, but the favoritism doesn't ring any alarm bells for her. Daphne, Persephone's childhood nymph friend, tells Thanatos that she doesn't understand why the favoritism bothers him so much. Why do you care? It's not like you're her co-worker, and your boss is obviously abusing his power. Ha 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 ha. The most tension we get between the two protagonists about this favoritism is a conversation where Persephone thinks the extent of her special treatment begins and ends with getting a nice business card. She never questions if Hades respects her in his own company. She doesn't even know how Hades is being inappropriate as her boss. So he continues his behavior by paying her when he's not allowed to. There's even a joke about it in episode 75. One episode almost disputes the favoritism when Thanatos accuses Hades of it, but then it spirals into Thanatos being a hypocrite, and then other characters show up, and then the initial debate's completely derailed, and well, if Lord Olympus doesn't care about this power imbalance, then why should I? It's not like the story brought up these problems in the first place within the text by making Hades fully aware of what he's doing and reminding readers how much he abuses his power. Ha 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 ha. These significant power imbalances aren't seriously challenged in meaningful ways, despite how frequently these ethics are brought up within the text. Both the story and its characters will dismiss whatever valid concerns other characters may have. Oh, also, I think some people who criticize Hades and Persephone's height difference will falsely imply that Persephone's height alone makes her childlike, and that short women being with tall men looks inherently predatory. But it's not that Persephone is just short and Hades is tall. She's also very naive to the point of farce. She's very young at first, and characters have claimed Hades looks old enough to be her father. And with all that, I do understand where some people are coming from when they say Persephone is depicted as childlike for most of Lore Olympus, but her height is simultaneously paired with other factors emphasizing her youth and general innocence. Being a short woman is cool, and I vouch for that, and I think height differences alone can be super cute, but Lore Olympus doesn't exist in a vacuum. Nothing does. One character who seriously disapproves of Persephone's future husband is their own mother, Demeter. But Demeter doesn't just want to protect Persephone, she wants to control her every move. And this is where Lore Olympus' modern retelling of Demeter's hymn becomes, unfortunately, familiar. Within the Greek mythology fandom, there's a popular idea about the god who kidnaps Persephone and the goddess who looks for her. Hades isn't a bad guy at all, just misunderstood. Demeter, though, she's the real villain because she's just so darn clanky. Demeter's characterization throughout much of modern media is notably similar with some exceptions. Demeter is so overbearing and hypocritical a sage that Hades and Persephone stage a kidnapping to get her off their backs. She's more sympathetic in Legendary Journeys because Persephone gets kidnapped for real, but she's still depicted as a pushy mother who needs to relax. There's little characterization of Demeter in God School so far, as there are currently only 4 episodes. Instead of being Persephone's mother, Demeter is her friend and generally seems suspicious of Hades and Persephone more than anything. Underworld's Demeter is controlling too. She keeps Persephone away from men and shelters her from the rest of the world, which irritates Persephone in turn. Demeter makes no physical appearances in Chains of Olympus, Odyssey, and Hadestown, but she's briefly mentioned in all 3. In the Percy Jackson series, she appears in the last Olympian novel and scolds Persephone for choosing Hades as her husband. I warned you, daughter. This scoundrel Hades is no good. You could have married the god of doctors or the god of lawyers. But no, you had to eat that pomegranate. I still don't know much about Supergiant's Demeter, but spoiler warning, I guess? I heard she's not that much different from the clingier interpretations of her. I think she's cool though. That was funny to me. Not every modern interpretation of Demeter is the exact same, and she's not always framed poorly, but the baseline for her character is usually known to be clingy, controlling, obsessive, possessive, and that's what makes her unbearable to Persephone in most modern retellings. Lore Olympus Demeter is, you guessed it, all of the above. clingy, controlling, and so on. And even though Persephone still loves her, she resents Demeter for her actions. While Persephone still lived in the mortal realm, Demeter almost never let her go anywhere alone, heckled her for her studies, sheltered her from much of modern society outside the mortal realm, and kept her away from men. As a result, Persephone is very naive about the world around her to the point of not knowing what a belt dial is in episode 74. She fears she'll be stuck under Demeter's control even after the time skip. Demeter also hides Persephone's status as a fertility goddess, and Persephone doesn't find out until she goes to the underworld and greets the dead at the beach. For much of the story, up until episode 145, it's unclear why Demeter treats Persephone this way, and she's almost always depicted as villainous and suspicious, with little hinting at any other nuance she could have. Many characters will agree that she's a control freak who, more or less, needs to let Hades and Persephone be. While it seems Demeter is a one-note villain at first, we do see why she acts the way she does later on. She also has some backstory as a traitor during the Titanomachy, but she's still framed negatively regardless, and her initial reasoning for what she does still isn't taken seriously. Episode 145 reveals that Demeter is so protective of Persephone because she's a fertility goddess, fearing the male gods would take advantage of Persephone's powers and ultimately kill her. And there's an entire history of male gods in Lord Olympus doing this with the few other fertility goddesses of the past, like with Gaia, Rhea, and Metis, who is Demeter's own mother. Kronos becomes interested in Persephone because she's a fertility goddess too. These male gods also just happen to be part of Hades' immediate family, whether it be Ouranos, his grandfather, Kronos, his father, or Zeus, his brother. Demeter believes this will continue with Hades and Persephone. Hades and his brothers are also known to have bad track records with women. Demeter knows male gods like Zeus leave pregnant women and their children behind. He burned her crops when she refused to hide another nymph he impregnated. Not to mention that several of the men who are supposed to be likable either take advantage of Persephone in other ways or put her in specific danger that gets brushed over. And that all adds up. Those are pretty good reasons to want to protect your daughter, but Demeter's ridiculed for this too. When she explains it to Hecate in episode 145, one comedic panel shows them wearing tinfoil hats, which are used as visual shorthands to imply someone's irrational and paranoid. The story repeatedly proves her wrong through framing her character and Hades' relationship with Persephone. Only Hecate tries actively understanding why Demeter believes Persephone's powers make her vulnerable to male gods. So while Demeter has her reasons for sheltering Persephone, she's framed as overreacting anyway. Yeah, it's wrong she would shelter Persephone so much, but Demeter is always villainized, down to her fears for her daughter, as if she has no legitimate fears to begin with. Lord Olympus reinforces this through directly comparing Demeter and Hades. While her actions and fears are silly no matter what, Hades has good intentions and wouldn't do anything to take advantage of Persephone or restrict her freedom like Demeter does, even when he's overprotective of her himself. But I'll get to him later. Oh, I'll get to you, trust. Hades' comb is literally more valuable than the pin Persephone's own mother gives her. Persephone goes to a pawn shop in episode 123, and when presented with Demeter's pin and Hades' comb, the shop owner says the pin is worthless. The comb, though, is something she can work with. While Lord Olympus takes a less charitable approach to the goddess of the harvest, the Homeric hymn sympathizes with her instead, or at the very least, doesn't actively make her look like an annoying nag of a mother. The hymn itself doesn't dismiss her concerns for Persephone. In fact, Persephone longs to see Demeter again when Hades kidnaps her. Lines 35 through 37 read, "She still had hope that she would yet see her dear mother and that special group, the immortal gods. For that long a time her great mind was soothed by hope, distressed as she was." While Demeter's hymn doesn't imply that she's overprotective of Persephone at all, it's clear that Demeter still wants to protect her and doesn't want her married off without either of their consent. She reacts like any loving mother when she hears her child was kidnapped. Late poet and essayist Adrian Rich also noticed how Demeter and Persephone's familial love and pain were centered in the Homeric hymn. She contextualized the abduction of Persephone as a lost rapture of a mother and daughter. The loss of the daughter to the mother to the daughter, is the essential female tragedy. The separation of Demeter and Persephone is an unwilling one. It is neither a question of the daughter's rebellion against the mother, nor the mother's rejection of the daughter. Each daughter, even in the millennia before Christ, must have longed for a mother whose love for her and whose power was so great as to undo rape and bring her back from death. and every mother must have longed for the power of Demeter, the efficacy of her anger, the reconciliation with her lost self. In these retellings, Demeter is smothering Persephone more often than not, and Persephone seems to only find her agency and freedom through leaving Demeter and marrying Hades. I'm not saying marriage and men are bad, but the abduction of Persephone is constantly retold in a way that centers and glorifies the blatantly predatory men while simultaneously villainizing the mother trying to protect her daughter, a daughter who clearly loved her mother and nothing less than the Homeric hymn. Lore Olympus is no stranger to this. Demeter is indeed nuanced in this comic, more than it seems. She has good reasons to hide her daughter away from much of the world, and she's more like her hymn counterpart at first glance because she tries protecting Persephone. But because the story frames her a certain way, including how her past interactions with Hades implied that she always saw Persephone as an object and is only really keeping them apart because she's petty, I don't know if Lore Olympus will give her more of the understanding I personally think she needs. It'd be nice if she eventually reconciles with Persephone and rebuilds their relationship. Demeter could understand her parenting was stifling, and Persephone could understand why her mother was doing it in the first place, even though it was still unhealthy to do. They hug, fade to black, roll credits. I don't know about Persephone needing perfect grades though. That doesn't sound like something coming from a place of genuine concern. But in relation to Demeter's general character and her relationship with Persephone and retellings, Hades doesn't have to be automatically predatory for Demeter and Persephone to have a healthy and loving relationship either. Demeter could very well just be a regular mom who loves her daughter and doesn't smother every opportunity for agency. There can be other internal and external conflicts for Hades and Persephone's romance that have nothing to do with Demeter. So for Lore Olympus to go out of its way to make her look as villainous and unreasonable as possible, even for wanting to protect her child, is unfortunate. She looks to be less of a concerned but very flawed mother and more of, well,
How do you know what's good for me? That's my opinion!
So Demeter's not put in the best light. Fine. However, you'd think Lore Olympus would balance that out with giving Persephone a strong female support system away from Demeter, but it barely tries with this, and we rarely get to see her with these friends if they have little to do with her love interest. I'm not gonna list Persephone's friendships in these modern retellings, but I do want to repeat that in Demeter's hymn, she was playing with friends when Gaia lured her away to the flower. Even though the hymn doesn't actually show their reactions, they'd probably feel similar to how they're depicted in these paintings. For as long as the story is, and despite knowing a lot of women, Persephone's relationships with them in Lore Olympus are strained. Besides the characters who are mostly antagonistic to her, her female friendships have very little depth, as most of her conversations with these friends will heavily involve Hades in some way. And yeah, of course Persephone will talk about Hades because that's her love interest, but he's almost all she talks about. If she and her friends are talking about him, they usually don't talk at all. This goes for our male friends too, but this isn't about them right now. The most egregious example of this is with her childhood friends who died before she met Hades. Before living on Olympus with Artemis, Persephone spent most of her time with flower nymphs she created as a child. They were her first friends, and she cherished them. She and Demeter made a treaty with humans to prevent them from uprooting the flowers that gave the nymphs life. But when humans broke this treaty anyway, and didn't take Persephone's status as a minor goddess seriously, her friends died right before her eyes after she yelled at them to leave her alone. She killed one human in an uncontrollable rage, and then accidentally killed even more as she grew giant and made everything worse. This massacre, intentional or not, was an act of wrath she committed without Zeus' permission, something Demeter fails to hide for long. That time skip I mentioned before was from the result of a trial that sentenced Persephone to stay in the mortal realm until she met Zeus' demands to fulfill her and Demeter's roles for the humans. Persephone goes to Olympus with her actions and grief seemingly weighing on her mind, but her relationship with these nymphs are never explored in depth unless it's to showcase her lack of freedom with Demeter. She only mentions her friends in passing, with no prolonged positive flashbacks aspects of them together. The most we see of them interacting is through one-off panels with no dialogue. If she wasn't actively sneaking off alone already, Persephone usually looked irritated whenever they were around her, as Demeter had nymphs accompany her almost everywhere. And when explaining her recollection of her act of wrath to Hades in episode 131, she emphasizes her resentment for Demeter and her status as a minor goddess, which made the humans mock her when they killed her friends. As a character, Persephone can obviously have multiple feelings at once, but because there isn't equal time spent on her actual grief over the nymphs' deaths up until episode 115, compared to her feelings about Demeter and how others will underestimate her, this unintentionally makes Persephone look more concerned for her freedom and status than her loss. There's no established mystery as to how the nymphs died, but it's more of a shocking reveal that they died at all. Persephone directly kills the humans for uprooting the flowers in Thanatos' semi-fake retelling, while her recollection adds an element of the humans mocking her before she kills them. These multiple feelings may have been more balanced if all three of them were combined in Persephone's thoughts. Maybe she could have told Hades she thought her friends would still be alive if she was a more prominent figure in ancient Greek society. The poor establishment of Persephone's nymph friends is further reinforced through their severe lack of characterization. They have no personalities to speak of, their names are mostly unknown until the trial arc, and they're not even told apart within the story. I didn't even have to name drop them for much of this section anyway. It's only in episode 181 where their names are revealed to be Crocus and Withy. They have no thoughts of their own on screen, no worries, no personal interests, nothing but Persephone's loyalty. It's not even clear which nymphs are which because they look the exact same and the story never establishes them as individual characters. This panel in episode 131 where they overwhelm Persephone doesn't help. Not only were their names still unknown at the time, they also bowed their heads and hid their faces with their hair as Persephone expressed how every day blended together in the mortal realm. During my very first 3 readings, I even thought more nymphs died because of their very similar appearances, especially because none of them had names before Daphne was introduced. Intentionally or not, Crocus and Withy are presented as interchangeable with each other, only stepping stones for Persephone's act of wrath and little else. The other female friends Persephone has are a little better off, but still suffer from the lack of positive, meaningful interactions with her that have nothing,
if very little, to do with Hades.
For one thing, most of Persephone's family is nameless and grouped together too. While we get to see Hades' relationships with characters like Nyx, Metis, Zeus, and more, Persephone's family doesn't get this individuality. Daphne isn't introduced until episode 94, but only through a silent TV ad. Her second appearance is through a male character's eyes as he comments on one of her social media posts. Persephone doesn't imply she knows her whatsoever until episode 113. The only time we see Artemis and Persephone hang out alone is at Zeus' party way back in the beginning, and their conversation's still very brief. After Hecate befriends Persephone in the mortal realm, they write letters to each other, but the only one we see is through Hades' eyes while he's reading it. All 3 characters are supposed to be Persephone's friends, but most of their conversations on screen are about Hades in some way. Hecate and Persephone's reunion in the underworld is especially funny for this because immediately after saying hi to each other, Persephone asks where Hades is for her internship information. I know they've written letters to each other, but they don't even segue into talking about Hades before Hecate explains intern tasks and leaves. At this point, Persephone hasn't even known him for 4 days. 4 days!
Y'all be weak in the knees. Stand up! Stand up!
Minthy's a special case because she's Persephone's rival and foil up until Persephone accidentally turns her into a mint plant. This rivalry comes from a man, but the thing I personally find unfortunate is how we still have yet to see them actively rebuilding their relationship to be healthier even after the time skip. All that drama and pain and petty rivalry over a man that one of them barely knows, cringe, leads to the plot skipping over Minthy's progress with Persephone until the flashback episodes, I guess. Minthy's a very complex character that I honestly feel bad for. I wish she wasn't villainized so much up to her redemption arc that we have yet to see in depth. Her relationship with Hades was unhealthy for both of them, but I really wanted to see her happy and work through her problems. And she did! Mostly off screen, but she did! Actually, she and Persephone could have been friends already. Maybe best friends? That'd be a nice turn of events for the romance with a typical female rivalry over a man. You know, where the female protagonist is usually milder than her usually villainous competition, who intentionally wears more revealing clothing and has sexual experience unlike the protagonist. Oh no. The implications with villainizing these specific women are getting to me! Persephone doesn't even have a small group of named female friends to leave behind for Hades. Daphne even mentions how much Persephone talked about wanting to sleep with him when she was stuck in the mortal realm for her punishment. It'd be funny if she did have friends like this who worried for her, while the story leaned into her throwing away her life for him. The potential character development and drama are endless. Look, Persephone, you and Hades are cute together and we couldn't be happier for you, but you've been putting out Girls' Night for 5 months now. It's pretty cringe. Many male characters, some that Persephone hasn't even known that long within the current timeline of the story, have been introduced much sooner than Daphne herself. Several male characters who are supposed to get along with her have acted predatory toward her in some way. They've either taken advantage of her, put her in dangerous situations, or both. Ares pretends he can't read so he can eventually make out with her. Eros gets Persephone very drunk and helps Aphrodite sneak her into Hades' car. And when Hades finds her in his back seat after getting home, instead of at least finding someone who will safely take her off his hands, he brings her inside his house anyway, tucking her in bed, wiping away her tears with his fingers, and calling her sweetness. He thinks she's a complete stranger at this point, by the way. The story mostly brushes over all these actions male characters have done. The conflict that comes from any of it is resolved very quickly and is usually never brought up again. Persephone's embarrassment from these situations is much more prominent than the fear she may have about any potential danger. These men don't have to struggle with regaining her trust. At the very least, we don't see it happen on screen. Yeah, she's naive and forgiving, but these actions are never something that severs her relationships with these men. It's like she doesn't know any better about the immediate implications of these actions, and never gets to experience prolonged anger from them. After Eros explains why he helped Aphrodite and then apologizes, Persephone forgives him and asks for his number. He even gets to apologize for what he did by bringing apology donuts to Artemis' house, even though she claims with great force that men are forbidden in this house. Okay, small tangent time. I think Artemis' hypocrisy would have been stronger and more impactful if she was more consistent with it and kept all men out of the house except for her brother Apollo. She apologizes to Persephone for her hypocrisy, but I don't know, this whole thing about her keeping men out for her and Persephone's vows of chastity fell flat for me. But at least she's written to feel bad about it and they reconcile and they're talking about Hades again. While Demeter's hymn depicts Persephone enjoying her time with friends before Gaia lures her away, Lore Olympus makes little effort to prioritize her female friendships outside of Hades' character. When telling Demeter how she was kidnapped, it takes 6 lines for Persephone to list all the friends she was with before Gaia lured her away. But Lore Olympus doesn't even attempt to tell Crocus and Withy apart for her. She wants to do so much, and all she seems to care about is Hades whenever she talks to the people around her. There are a few moments that combat this though, brief as they may be. Episode 11 has Artemis giving Persephone her very first phone and they take a photo with it. In episode 188, Hecate asks Persephone what she'll do after the trial is over, and Persephone tells her she wants to study for law school. This reminds readers how much she loves school. Hecate, I'm just kidding, Hades interrupts them before Hecate can even respond, which doesn't irritate me in any way. I also like the scene in episode 220 where Daphne shows her support for Persephone when they see Apollo's poster. I'll talk about him later. These kinds of interactions Persephone has with other female characters are scarce, but they do pop up. Persephone may get to experience life on her own through Olympus, but even after leaving the mortal realm behind, the story still gives her little room to control and experiment with a big part of her character, her sexuality. In Greek mythos, Persephone was first named Kore, which meant maiden. After Hades made her his queen, she was given the name most people know her for now, which means bringer of death. There's a lot of lore behind her as a goddess that I won't get into, but ancient Greeks did fear her and were afraid of saying her name out loud. While Persephone did become one of the most powerful goddesses in Greek mythos after becoming queen of the underworld, she still didn't choose to be queen. In Demeter's hymn, line 344 describes her as yearning for her mother when Ares comes to get her back, after she's already in the underworld with Hades. and Hermes found the Lord inside his palace, along with his duly acquired bedmate yearning for her mother. With many retellings, Persephone is rewritten to choose Hades and her title as ruler of the dead with pride. She usually loves him, even if he kidnaps her.
Besides, it's kind of sexy.
Sexy. He kidnaps you, your mother sends Nate on a rampage, and all you can think of is sexy.
While most of the newer aforementioned media writes Persephone this way, The Lightning Thief, Odyssey, and Chains of Olympus either imply or blatantly state otherwise.
The only thing I look forward to is my allotted time away from this hellhole. A war of the gods would put an end to that. And I'd be alone, with only him, forever.
Lore Olympus Persephone wants to choose different aspects of her life, including Hades. But she's only given illusions of choice through her lack of sexual agency, down to the clothes she wears for much of the comic.
I also completely forgot that the goddess of chaos, Eris, controlled Persephone through her act of wrath, so she doesn't have agency through that either, and she didn't even unlock her own powers with a deeper, subconscious side of herself. I'm sorry, this plot twist actually ticked me off. The trial arc is the first time we see Eris and the first time she's mentioned, ever. Why can't Persephone really revel in her own anger? Why is her agency denied here too? Like, be for real.
Because of Demeter, Persephone was once in the Goddesses of Eternal Maidenhood, a program made up of goddesses taking vows of eternal chastity. They strive to serve others and become good role models. Persephone doesn't really want to stay in this program and ends up trying to sleep with Hades after the time skip. But for most of the story so far, she's very naive, especially when it comes to her own body and the men around her who find her attractive. She's clueless about euphemisms. When she sees the tabloid headline of her and Hades together, she takes sleeping to the top literally. She thinks hooking up just means making out when she tells Eros she hooked up with Ares. But somehow she knows what Apollo means when he says Hades is just trying to get into her pants. She'll be in her underwear around men she's not romantically involved with, like Hermes and Eros, and doesn't seem to know the social implications of being naked around them. It's not that she doesn't care, she's characterized to be ignorant of it. She casually tells Artemis that Hermes has seen her naked a bunch of times, not because they've actually slept together, but because he's talked to her in the mortal realm while she bathed in the lake. Artemis herself has to remind Persephone about wearing pants in the house, as she repeatedly pulls Persephone's shirt down when Eros is there apologizing. Several men, including Hades, will also notice how attractive Persephone is when she's completely unaware of how they feel. Ignoring how much Hades does this for now, Ares and other male characters have ogled her before. One nameless man even whistles at her while she waits for the train, but she doesn't react in any way. After the time skip in episodes 197 and 219, she's still unaware that men find her attractive when she goes to the underworld and visits the city. Many panels will emphasize Persephone's body with close-ups, aesthetically pleasing clothing, and visual effects, like sparkles. Sometimes even her face will be cut off frame, but she's never actively sexual in these moments, like in episodes 11, 21, 114, and 219. Episode 114's sexualization feels really unnecessary because you could say her sudden nakedness reminds the audience she's a fertility goddess, but we don't see any other fertility goddesses with these kinds of powers where their clothes disappear, so look funny! Even in episode 75, when she imagines getting her ears pierced, the panel prioritizes how she looks as a whole. Instead of a panel zoomed in on her earrings, or showing all the earrings she could wear, her whole body's in frame with added sparkles. Compare this panel where she pulls up her sweater to see the leaves on her body, to the one where she's taking off her club dress. It's not supposed to be attractive when she pulls up her sweater. Her powers are getting out of control. But when she takes off her club dress, she's turned away from the reader, her butt's completely in frame, and we see her thong. Hades' point of view panels contribute to Persephone's sexualization throughout Lore Olympus too. There's nothing wrong with someone showing sexual attraction, but we almost never see Persephone view Hades this way, and the comic itself will rarely sexualize him intentionally. There are numerous panels of Hades' point of view as he ogles Persephone with the same visual effects and framing I mentioned before. I counted 7, and this doesn't include his general horniness. Persephone, on the other hand, has far fewer moments where we see her ogle Hades and mention what she thinks is hot about him. Persephone mostly just thinks about his smile and the nice things he says, but she never goes on about his chest or his voice. The only times I've noticed her unambiguously ogle him is when she sees him in a different physical form at the hospital, the cutaway gag where Demeter thinks Persephone is scared for her life in the underworld, and the example panel where she's talking to her therapist. She tells her therapist that she's been feeling more sexual attraction than ever before, but it looks like we mostly have to take her word for it. We don't even get to see her close-up reaction in this panel where Hades pulls up his shirt to wipe the sweat off his face. She looks more uncomfortable than anything. There's not a single new flower in sight. These feelings really blossom after the time skip. She's more blatant about it, though it's mostly presented as comedic. While there are panels showing Hades' body, they come across as more neutral, unlike with Persephone. There are usually no close-ups of his body parts where his face isn't the focus of the frame, nor do panels emphasize his body with aesthetically pleasing clothing and visual effects, because he almost never changes his clothes. If he does, it's usually not the main focus. When nameless characters talk about his butt in one episode, we don't see a close-up of it.
Even in episode 210 after the time skip,
we don't see Hades undress when he goes swimming with Persephone, but we see her do it. Persephone also had no active romantic or sexual experience before meeting Hades. She knows she's not experienced like him, as she tells him he's used to women coming to his office in their underwear. She made out with Ares, but that's all she did, and he lied to her to do so. She clearly doesn't want to be a virgin forever, but she doesn't date or have sex in secret either. Meanwhile, Hades has been with multiple partners. He's gone to strip clubs, he's called escorts before, he's had a girlfriend, he gets to experiment, but Persephone has no other choice in the story before dating and eventually sleeping with him. He's not just presented as the best choice for her, but the only choice. Multiple men are interested in her, but she only dates Hades. She doesn't want to date anyone else but Hades. Persephone regularly wears clothes she didn't intend to for much of Lore Olympus. Characters will buy clothes for her, sometimes actively ignoring what she wants. 2 dresses have emphasized her body, and she was visibly uncomfortable in one of them. But no matter what other characters make her wear, all that matters is how attractive she looks. Her discomfort's ignored in episode 3 when Hades ogles her through his glasses, and we see panels of her individual body parts. Eros interrupts Persephone when she asks if she can choose her own clothes when they go shopping, but she ends up thanking him anyway, and the panel revealing one of her dresses is aesthetically pleasing. She can't even wear what she wants in the underworld without Hades, Hecate, and other characters giving her clothes. She goes shopping with Hades at the mall, but they only seem to buy traditional Greek clothes, something Persephone never chooses to wear after leaving for Olympus. Hades even reacts to the work uniform Megara gives her to greet the dead, and just like usual, she has no clue how Hades sees her. I have a strong handle over my impulses. There you are! Look, I'm a fury! No! I'm here to punish you! Grrr!
Masculine panic.
With the exception of Daphne, other female characters who are outwardly more sexual than Persephone are negatively depicted as sleazy, home-wrecking, and jealous of her, like Minthe, Aphrodite, and Thetis. This specifically involves women who are aware of their bodies, are implied to have casual sex with multiple men, and will sometimes use their bodies to their advantage with no qualms. Daphne is the only female character so far who's notably sexual and isn't simultaneously antagonistic to Persephone out of envy or general petty hatred. There are more aesthetically pleasing panels of Persephone being completely oblivious to her body than there are of other female characters who strive to flaunt what they have. And a much more sexually confident Persephone wouldn't automatically mean there'd be no problems with this aspect of her character, but it'd give her more agency within the story, and it'd be a little easier to get behind the framing of her body sometimes. It'd probably be much better if Hades was around her age, but Lore Olympus tries tackling purity culture through the goddesses of eternal maidenhood by showing how stifling the program is, and that most of the maiden goddesses don't even follow their own rules. But the story turns around and sexualizes Persephone when she's had no space to be sexual before meeting Hades. Characters will point out how he and his brothers objectify Persephone when talking about her, but Lore Olympus also frames Persephone in ways she didn't consent to within the current context, making her oblivious of her own body. Other female characters who are more actively sexual will usually be framed negatively, and definitely not as attractive as her. While Hades gets to have consensual relationships before meeting her, Persephone doesn't get that choice either. In fact, the story will trivialize her trauma to progress her relationship with her love interest and further characterize him as the best option she has. I'm not an assault survivor, so it's not my place to claim if Persephone's actions directly involving her trauma reflect what real-life survivors would do. I completely understand if you relate to her as a survivor. I'll focus on how the story's structure uses the assault as a plot device to frame Hades as a good person and develop his relationship with Persephone, decentering her and sometimes giving little room for her character to process her trauma independent of him. Even though Artemis acts like she keeps men out of the house, she lets several male characters in anyway, including Apollo. He's creepy, rude, patronizing, and Persephone is immediately uncomfortable with him when they first meet. When she expresses this discomfort to Artemis, Artemis tries explaining her brother's behavior, telling Persephone that he's just trying to look out for her in his own way. Later that same day, Apollo sneaks into Persephone's room, wakes her up, and sexually assaults her. During her assault, she wonders what to do, confused and scared, eventually disassociating herself until Apollo leaves. The scene of Persephone's assault seems to be handled with care, and it doesn't graphically depict what happens to her. She talks to her therapist about it, and we see her learning that neither her abuse nor her abuser define her. Most characters who learn about her assault will support her without question, and that's also nice to see. But there are several instances where Persephone's trauma is tied with Hades' character. When Apollo leaves, she texts Hades after taking a shower and cutting her hair. After the episode about his childhood trauma, the next 3 episodes focus on their first phone call together. They talk about their relationships and roles as gods and exchange cute banter, but Persephone doesn't get time to try processing what happened to her before Hades calls her. She's able to express her feelings about the assault in the moment, but not after it happens. Her inner monologue about it disappears when Apollo leaves. The story moves those feelings aside for the phone call. The same episode of her assault ends on a cliffhanger of Hades calling her after she texts him. When Eros learns she's not a virgin anymore through his powers, he asks Persephone if her first time was with Hades before she tells him what happened. When she tries confronting Apollo in episode 98, he claims Hades lied to her about him and that he's jealous of Apollo. Readers don't even see her make Venar about Apollo until episode 183, when she brings Hades to the old vacation shed she'd visit with Demeter. She hasn't visited this shed again since, nor do we see her make other kinds of Venar about Apollo. We don't know how she processed her trauma in the motorhome for all those years, away from her therapist. She doesn't start therapy because of her assault or any other long-term emotional conflict she has. Not for Demeter's parenting, not for killing the humans in her act of wrath, and not for losing Crocus and Withy. It's because she starts feeling inadequate for Hades after Leto tells her about his previous affair with Hera. Lore Olympus will also pit Hades and Apollo against each other through visual parallels and characterization. They both do the same things, but they're framed differently. They both ogle Persephone through their glasses. They both give her a coat and lean in close to her. She sits in both of their cars. Neither of them specifically knew when her birthday was. Persephone questions Apollo for immediately leaving after assaulting her, and then Hades tells her he'll stay on the phone with her when she asks him not to leave. Right after she sees Apollo texted her, she deletes it, only to see Hades text too. The story still compares them in episode 208, when Persephone goes into Hades' mind while Kronos possesses him. At first, she's married to Apollo, and then immediately after is married to Hades instead. She temporarily struggles to remember that being with Apollo is very wrong, but after breaking away from her nightmare, she sees herself in Hades' dream, as he wishes to start a family with her. With this, the story constantly props up Hades through Persephone's trauma with Apollo. Unlike Apollo, he's written to understand Persephone and be mindful of her sexual boundaries. Apollo's written to see her as nothing but an object for his own gain. As a character by himself, Apollo does embody male entitlement, and it's interesting to see how. He thinks he owns Persephone and ignores her obvious disinterest in him, but he's repeatedly used to make Hades look like a better person. Fortunately, Lore Olympus fans know that Apollo is a rapist. They constantly bash his character. They express understanding and support for Persephone, so it feels even more out of place for readers to see these parallels between Hades and Apollo within the comic. Their comparisons are in poor taste because of what Apollo did. His presence is reduced to entertaining drama. Instead of Apollo just being framed as the actual threat he is, he's also framed as a threat to Hades and Persephone's relationship, specifically competition for Hades himself. However, fans will lean into these comparisons anyway, which is clear in episode 24's comment section. The top comments aren't written with bad intentions. It's very reassuring to see people understand that Persephone was assaulted, even when some comments present these thoughts immaturely. However, several top comments are specifically focused on what Hades has to do with Persephone's assault and how he'll confront Apollo for it, not Persephone herself ultimately confronting and punishing Apollo in the future. These comments will prioritize Hades' feelings and his reaction to Apollo, giving him a role as her protector in this hypothetical scenario. On a lighter note, when Persephone does eventually end up with Hades in the underworld, there's no sun there. Apollo will never be in her sight again. Hades, get your butt in gear and take Persephone back. I honestly can't wait until Hades finds out about this. It's not just the fans who do this, but so does Webtoon's site itself. One fan posted an ad notification pitting Apollo and Hades against each other, which also further decenters Persephone from her own feelings about Apollo and prioritizes how her love interest will handle her rapist. It was clickbait, but the notification was nonetheless focused on Hades and how he'd react if he knew what happened to Persephone and who did it. And yes, it's good that he supports her after she tells him. Still, the way Lore Olympus will use Persephone's own sexual trauma as a catalyst to indirectly praise him is callous. In fact, it's like the whole story is used to serve Hades in some way, to make him look good, to give him more social power, more worldly experience. There are a lot of big things Persephone wants to do with her life, but we rarely see those things in detail unless it has to do with Hades. She says her greatest honor in life is being with him and in the underworld. She mostly talks with her friends about him, and the friends who never could get no individuality to speak of. We don't even see her college life in detail unless it involves negative experiences. Hades and the audience learn about Persephone's apartment at the same time, and for now, she seems to spend most of her time at Hades' house anyway. The only person she has a crush on, goes on a date with, has consensual sex with, is him. But despite kidnapping Persephone, was Hades a kind husband and Demeter's him? And does Lore Olympus characterize him well enough to be likable? Hades was most likely not a kind husband in Demeter's hymn, and Lore Olympus fails to characterize him well enough to be likable. Ancient Greek mythos didn't characterize Hades as evil, but at the very least, he was morally dubious like his brothers. Modern interpretations of his character will villainize him a lot, but instead of being evil for kidnapping Persephone, he's mostly just characterized like the Christian version of the devil. Greek translations of the Bible would translate words describing dark realms of the dead to Hades, so the connotation eventually stuck. You may or may not hear this kind of spooky music in the background, which is the field theme for Hercules' Underworld in Kingdom Hearts 2. While Hades wasn't an evil god, the ancient Greeks feared him in the underworld, most likely because they didn't know what to really expect in the afterlife. We still don't. Hades' most well-known appearance is in Demeter's hymn for kidnapping Persephone. Not only does she still yearn for her mother in the underworld, but the hymn describes her as under duress, forced, when Hermes goes to bring her back to the mortal realm. And there she is, sitting with everyone's favorite wholesome goth husband. And Hermes found the Lord inside his palace, seated on a funeral couch, along with his duly acquired bedmate, the one who was much under duress, yearning for her mother, and suffering from the unbearable things inflicted on her by the will of the blessed ones. When Persephone reunites with Demeter, she tells her in detail how she ate the pomegranate seeds through lines 407 through 413. When Hermes came to me with the news from Zeus that I should come from Erebus, so that you may see me with your own eyes and let go of your wrath, I sprang up for joy, but Hades stealthily put into my hand the berry of the pomegranate, and he compelled me by force to eat of it. While Demeter is upset at Zeus for making the deal with Hades, the hymn also describes Hades as sneaky. forceful, someone Persephone never implies she wants to be with. He peers around him when tricking her into eating the pomegranate seeds. This doesn't stop some newer retellings from interpreting him more sympathetically. Epicurus the sage depicts Hades as relatively neutral, though he likes Persephone's political passion. Persephone resents him in The Lightning Thief because he's her abuser. Hades Town depicts him as a capitalistic tycoon who profits off of slave labor, where he tricks the dead into working for him. They follow Orpheus to protest their working conditions. Legendary Journeys, God's School, and Ponderworld all soften his character so he's more reserved, coming across as misunderstood and expressing some kind of loneliness. Legendary Journeys specifically has Persephone choose to see Hades and Demeter for specific parts of the year, but when Hades first bargains with Hercules to keep Persephone by trying to empathize with him, Hercules doesn't budge.
She's the only bright spot in this whole place. Can't help that. What you did was wrong. If you take her, I'll be doomed to the same emptiness you felt when you lost your whole family. Can't let her stay.
Hades doesn't physically appear in Chains of Olympus, but his domain does as a bonus challenge for the player. In Odyssey, Hades is somewhat of a trickster stringing the human characters along. He seems to find joy in their misery.
Feed him to your hounds.
I was hoping you'd say that.
I didn't finish playing Supergiant's Hades, but right now he's extremely divorced and Zagreus can't stand him. Lore Olympus is interesting with its interpretation of Hades. He's obviously a very flawed person, but he's not written to be villainous. Flaws make characters interesting, so there's nothing wrong with Hades making mistakes. He doesn't need to be perfect, but he's in a romance that frames him as ultimately good. Readers are supposed to like him at some point. If we don't root for him immediately, we gotta do so eventually. With someone like him, he'd need a lot of character development and personal growth to be a better person. So why doesn't he get lasting consequences when he does terrible, terrible things? And why doesn't he gain meaningful character development from these actions while still being framed positively anyway? Calling Hades flawed is a gross understatement. He oversteps boundaries in positions of power. He's possessive, he's violent, he had an affair with his brother's wife. He repeatedly abuses his power and brags about it. Wait, did he say ongoing unpaid labor? And despite knowing it's wrong for several reasons, he fantasizes about a 19-year-old girl after learning her age anyway. He ogles her the minute he sees her, so much so that he's shown to look up pink flower nymph escorts that look like her. Okay, I know that all sounds really bad, but I need to just go on a little tangent to make it worse. The in-universe racism and fetishization of the nymphs are super strange because they usually go unchallenged within the text. The gods treat nymphs like second-class citizens. Hera calls Minthi nymph trash and also a trollop. The story's indifference seems unintentional, and I really hope it's not forever. But Psyche, the only visibly black character, is not just the only illiterate one at first, but she's also turned into a nymph under Aphrodite, who wanted to ruin her life because Psyche was thought of to be just as beautiful as her. And we don't get any of Psyche's thoughts about this as of late. She's a goddess now. She's got nothing to say about her experience within a fictional oppressed group of people, which is especially funny because she'd be part of a real oppressed group of people in reality. I mean, there didn't even have to be a weird undertone of in-universe racism because it's never properly addressed anyway. So this all makes Hades look even creepier for looking up and joking about nymphs, dating a nymph before and giving her a job and apartment because he was interested in her when she was financially struggling, because it kind of looks like he has a fetish for nymphs, an extremely rich man in extreme power who fetishizes an oppressed group of women. I personally wouldn't blame you for despising Hades as a person with all that in mind, no matter how good his hypothetical redemption arc is. That being said, Lore Olympus should at least try to make you like him eventually, but serious, lingering consequences for his more prominent actions are few and far between, so he doesn't really have to self-reflect. When he sexualizes Persephone, he gets called out for it, but his attempts to control his thoughts are comedic and kind of pointless because the comic itself will do this too. He blames her for his feelings, calling her a little minx in his inner monologue for wearing Megara's uniform. After knowing her for about 4 days, he gets so possessive of her that he rips a college student's eye out and beats him up for taking a tabloid photo of them walking in a parking lot together.
Whoa there, friend, you might need to slow down.
Of course, when Persephone's classmates learn about it, they avoid her and believe she directly got Hades to do it. But all she does is kindly explain to him what he did wrong. They both move on from this incident after they go to fix that student's eye. She's even spiteful to the guy for being scared and angry with Hades for, you know, ripping his eye out and beating him up. Hades could have gotten some really good character development from doing something so drastic, and it could have given their relationship negative and interesting tension. What if Persephone found out what he did and was actually really angry that he screwed up her relationships with her classmates? What if she was creeped out he would be so violent for her when they barely knew each other for such a short time, and he enacted this violence on someone who didn't even do anything that bad? What if she really kept her distance from him? Who knows? Hades also brags about profiting off of literal slave labor. He pays Persephone for her internship, but he won't spare a dime to the shades who work for him. In real life, he'd probably be friends with someone like Elon Musk or BlackBerry Creative CEO. This detail is so unimportant that I forgot about it twice. Instead of it being one of Hades' important character traits, with the weight it holds in our modern society, especially because the gods are modernized too, the slave labor isn't taken seriously. It's either a joke that doesn't pay off, nor makes Hades look any better, or it's used as a prop for more drama. The first 2 times Hades' slave labor is mentioned are for humor. He explains how he got rich, Persephone reacts negatively, and he immediately changes the subject. Later in another episode, Hades brings it up only to use it as something Persephone could react to, so he knows she's listening to him. The 3rd time it's brought up, it's used to segue into their first kiss. Lore Olympus isn't being tongue-in-cheek with bringing up Hades' slave labor either, like a dark joke you'd see in something like BoJack Horseman. It's literally just brushed off. And then later, it's used within a petty argument the story uses to get Hades and Persephone to burst with emotion and kiss for the first time. It seems like there doesn't really need to be an explanation for why Hades is rich at all, but if there needed to be one, it definitely didn't have to be slave labor, especially when the story doesn't take it as seriously as it should. There are no recurring human characters except for Psyche, who's disguised as a nymph for most of the story and becomes a goddess anyway. We don't see the shades disgruntled with their mistreatment, no secret uprisings, no cursing Hades behind his back, no pleading to other gods for better employment or anything. There's only an off-screen riot. When Persephone tries giving them coins, the panels also frame them as scary and desperate. They grab at her and move silently, like a hive mind. Eventually, during the trial arc, Persephone reveals to Hades and readers that she's planning to create Elysium, probably. This seemed like a good opportunity to have Hades reflect on the fact that Persephone thinks the way he runs the dead is so corrupt that she plans to do something different altogether. He can change his ways for her and his subjects. He can be better, a better king, a better person, a better boyfriend. Unfortunately, the slave labor element's just background fodder again. All Hades thinks about is how kind Persephone is to him, and nothing beyond that. Maybe, just maybe, the poor establishments of actions like these can be better contextualized if Hades actually learned from them. But he doesn't even do that! Besides being possessive and violent, he's also ill-tempered when he thinks Persephone needs protection. It's not that his outbursts are results of her being in immediate danger. He blows up over anything. The college student paparazzo, Poseidon asking if Persephone is available the day after Hades thinks he met her for the first time, a nurse she tells him about in the car before she sees a therapist, Demeter telling her she has to leave the underworld shortly after the time skip. Hades still has anger issues and gets overprotective. Persephone's told him on 2 separate occasions to calm down, not to mention the non-existent boundaries. Long story short, they've both overstepped the ones they tried setting up. But since Hades is much older and in a very high position of power, you'd think he would be more responsible around Persephone, especially because she's asked him to respect her boundaries twice before, which he fails to do. She said she wanted to take their relationship slow and that he needs to consult her before doing anything anything drastic in her name, but before she was sentenced, he already bought her a queen's crown, which she's still unaware of so far. They still weren't dating yet before the time skip, and they've probably known each other for 4 weeks at most. He continues to overstep Persephone's boundaries after the time skip too. She says she doesn't want to marry him yet, but he calls her his future wife anyway, trying to propose to her, as if he didn't listen to her. So far, the story hasn't used these specific instances for Hades to self-reflect and stop pressuring Persephone into marriage and official queendom through a coronation. Instead, these actions are just cute and quirky because he loves her so much and he can't help it. And I thought the first time he called her his wife was just a slip of the tongue. That doesn't seem to be the case.
Wait. Update. Oh my god. Hades proposed to Persephone in a newer episode and she said yes. She didn't want Hades to propose to her so soon. In her own words, she wanted to experience all the things in a relationship, so all that boundary talk was pointless. 6 episodes before the proposal, she told Hades not to pop the question. She just went on her first official dinner date with him, and now she's ready for cuffing season when she just said she wanted to take things slow. Stop playing with me. Stop playing in my face.
But the greatest sympathies Hades has to fall back on are his loneliness in relationship with Persephone. Oh God, is he lonely. He'll lament about it repeatedly. All it takes for Hera to give Persephone her internship is seeing how lonely Hades is. She notices him standing alone in her family portrait on the wall while everyone else is already married. She feels guilt over his sad eyes. The last time she talked to him was when she caught him objectifying Persephone with his brothers. But he's just so lonely. He needs someone who understands him, and that's where Persephone comes in. During the trial arc, he says the Olympian gods couldn't fathom her doing something nice for him. Just about everyone but Persephone assumes he acts with malice at some point. Hecate, his exes, his own brother Zeus probably. It's him and Persephone against the world and no one else. With their relationship written this way,
the story,
intentionally or not, also justifies how he treats Minthi and Persephone separately, even when he moves too quickly in both relationships. He calls Minthi a potentially okay queen of the underworld, and she fears he won't consider her feelings for becoming queen, but he rushes to get Persephone a crown she never implied she wanted so soon in their relationship, an action framed as romantic and caring, because she'll become queen anyway. Being with him and fixing up the underworld's the greatest honor in her life. He plucks a guy's eye out for Persephone when he only knew her for a few days, but he doesn't even argue with his sister-in-law when she calls Minthi a trollop and nymph trash right in front of him. But Hera's right, you see. Minthi's too aware of her body, and Persephone's only hot because she doesn't know it.
Excuse me, boys. Didn't your mommies tell you that's not the nice way to get a lady's attention?
Oh, and she's a goddess. No, a fertility goddess. She could cure his infertility and give him the family he always wanted. Not like that useless nymph. When Persephone asks for boundaries, they both overstep anyway with no consequences for their actual relationship. In fact, it progresses within the plot. She never truly questions his morality as a person. The story doesn't challenge Hades with Persephone's character because she has nothing truly bad to say about him. Even when his actions should speak loud and clear, she has no conflict with him no matter what he does. She points out how he's patronizing once, but with several other times he acts this way, she doesn't take any of it to heart. Even when he cups her chin and calls her little goddess to her face, she actually thinks he's the only one who respects her. Their conversations are always understanding, always supportive, always sweet or hot, and the only time they scream at each other is when they kiss out of passion. She doesn't even distance herself from him when he brags about profiting off of slave labor. She's supposed to be a kind character who feels really guilty about accidentally committing her act of wrath. So why would she be with someone who brags about treating humans so poorly when they're dead? And no, her one-off funny haha comment about capitalism being bad doesn't count. Wouldn't she feel guilty for not just committing a massacre, but for subjecting the humans she killed to eternal suffering under Hades' rule? Who knows? Who cares? Persephone doesn't, that's for sure.
Stand up! Stand up!
Lore Olympus wants to have its cake and eat it too with a very flawed and likable Hades, but it fails to actually do the work to make him, well, likable. His bigger flaws are already uncomfortable as is, and when given opportunities to give him meaningful character development and grow as a person, the story refuses to do so. He keeps making the same mistakes when he should be moving on to multiple character arcs, and we have little to actually root for with his character because of this. It feels like the story uses his loneliness and relationship with Persephone as a crutch for us to like him, but Demeter's right about him. He is a corporate, money-hungry, cold, arrogant, licentious shill of a god. He makes very few meaningful attempts to better himself for his love interest and the audience, but we're supposed to believe he's our favorite, wholesome goth husband. While Disney villainized Hades on 2 separate occasions, they didn't shy away from depicting him as someone who, for all intents and purposes, blatantly disrespects women's autonomy and forces them to do his bidding. For as inaccurate as their Greek myth retellings may be, I wonder if Hercules is a precursor for more people to learn just how sneaky and manipulative Hades can really be.
Aren't we forgetting one teensy-weensy but ever so crucial little tiny detail? I own you!
Huh. No wonder no one wants to die.
Confession time. Once, I was a pretty big Lore Olympus fan. My love for it was short-lived, but it was strong enough to notice. I loved the dreamy art, the fluff, the way Persephone was short and close to my age, and had trouble standing up for herself, but there was always a discomfort in the back of my mind. The age gap really put me off, and it made me uncomfortable the more I thought about it. I didn't understand why Persephone had to be so naive of her own body. I really didn't like this panel, but I couldn't exactly figure out why. I thought it was weird how little space and time Persephone had to process her trauma without the story bringing up Hades at all. So as much as I tried excusing my discomfort, it got harder to ignore. And eventually, I made a video about Lore Olympus. And then another one, which I kinda hate now from how rushed it is. Still, after rereading this comic 3 times for YouTube, I think I want to see how it ends, or at least I want to hear about it. A follow-up saw the question. The most you're gonna get is an updated pinned comment under this video with 3 or less sentences, and maybe some tweets. The story looks like it's going to end, but it's not over. We see Hades and Persephone have their first official dinner date, and they get to reconnect, and it's honestly kinda cute. We see them talk about their boundaries before almost sleeping together, and that's cool. Now those are boundaries Hades is guaranteed to respect. But I'm still complaining. Longtime fans are still complaining. I've looked up fan opinions for Lore Olympus right now, and some aren't happy with the story's direction. They're frustrated with all the buildup and little payoff, the sudden changes in tense relationships, the almost complete disregard of more serious tones. And I get it, because I was a fan too. It's unfortunate to see people feel this way about something that brought them joy for a long time. I don't know if Spectacle Lore Olympus fans will be satisfied by the end, but I hope they are. I hope everyone is. But that doesn't mean it's off the hook for how it retells the abduction of Persephone. That's what the whole video was about. This comic does the same thing many retellings have done too while trying to be more socially progressive, recontextualizing the myth so Demeter is specifically villainized while Hades is praised in her place. Ancient Greek society and mythos are both notoriously misogynistic. So what makes Hades any different from his predatory brothers when he literally kidnaps a goddess against her will and is implied to have abused her, to sneak around with his actions, to go behind both the goddess and her mother's backs for this marriage? I get that a lot of people would rather not have women be ripped of their agency and their trauma dismissed in Greek myth, even punished for it. Despite how misogynist they can be, these myths are very popular. It's not surprising for people to reclaim them, including Demeter's hymn. Wouldn't it be nice if Persephone wasn't abused? If her husband blatantly cared for her personhood and she chose to be with him? But at the same time, I also see the value in the hymn. It is jarring to see the more intentionally feminist retellings villainize Demeter in the process, ripping her own power away and her justified anger at predatory men, and reducing her to a terrible, overbearing parent who, frankly, needs to get that scythe out of her butt. It's jarring to see Persephone rewritten to blatantly hate being around her own mother that she deeply loved and look for freedom in the same man who originally kidnapped her in the first place. The girl bossification of Persephone's kidnapping isn't as fresh and new as people like to think it is either, especially now. I already listed a chunk of retellings with very similar bases, even when these retellings don't blatantly intend to be feminist. Persephone can't stand her mom because she's so annoying. Then she stumbles across an emo, misunderstood man who will treat her like the queen she is, and for one reason or another, her mom hates that.
Don't be overbearing like everyone keeps telling me you are. Are we sure your daughter didn't just run away?
I'm honestly pretty skeptical of most retellings I come across in general. Again, I love Supergiant's Hades, and I'm getting that sequel in my virtual hands. I just think about its origins every now and then too. But the bottom line is that retelling the abduction of Persephone comes with a nasty can of worms. There are lots of questions to consider. What kind of audience is this retelling for? How's Hades framed compared to his brothers? Does Persephone have positive relationships with other women besides her mother? Or are these relationships deemed less valuable, even harmful, compared to her romance with Hades? And many, many more. While there are dozens of reinterpretations of the abduction of Persephone, there are others that also aim to keep its original themes intact. Grendel Menz is an illustrator who explores Greek mythology through art, showing compassion to the disenfranchised women and leaving no room to coddle the predatory men who are now celebrated more than ever. One comic about the abduction of Persephone reads as follows: "Is there anything more romantic than Persephone in Hades? How lovely was it Zeus to give her to the god of the underworld. How sweet of Hades to prey upon her, to tire her, to steal her, to fight her friend Cyane, a nymph, and leave her to weep herself to water, to trick her mother, who knew what happened to wives, into straying from her child's side. How dreamy it is, Demeter clawing at the earth for her daughter, distraught, goddesses made powerless, a favorite image of poets. We sing of handsome Hades forcing seeds down Persephone's throat. Hades, we croon a tender and innocent god. Fuck that Demeter, we snarl, for making poor Hades lonely half the year."